All right, today we're going to dive into one of the most intense periods in Spain's history, the 20th century. I mean, think about it. A country that had a king, then a dictator, then a democracy, and then a horrible civil war, all within the span of a single lifetime. So how did so much happen so fast?
Right, that's the big question, isn't it? How did Spain manage to go from having a king to fighting a war against itself in just a little over 30 years? It's a really complicated story, but to figure it out, we've got to go right back to the beginning of the century.
So picture this. It's the start of the 1900s, and Spain has a king, but the kingdom itself is in a whole lot of trouble. It had just lost its last big colonies. The economy was a mess, and people were starting to get really unhappy. And who was in charge of all this? A very, very young king.
And here he is, King Alfonso XIII. He got the crown when he was just 16 years old. Can you imagine having the weight of an entire country on your shoulders at that age? His time as king was, maybe not surprisingly, full of non-stop political problems and social chaos.
You know, the whole country was like a pressure cooker just waiting to explode. Politically, you had the two main parties, and they were constantly fighting each other for power instead of actually fixing things. At the same time, you had workers and farmers demanding better conditions, and the army was stuck in an expensive war. The whole situation was just explosive.
Yeah, something had to break. The government was pretty much paralyzed, and the country was getting dangerously close to total chaos. And in 1923, things finally snapped, and it happened in the form of a military takeover.
A general, a guy named Primo de Rivera, decided he'd had enough. With the king's blessing, he led a coup. He got rid of the government, threw out the constitution, and basically just declared himself the new leader of Spain. In one move, democracy was out, and a new period of one-man rule was in.
So, Primo de Rivera became what we call a dictator. And what is that exactly? Well, it's one person who rules a whole country with total power. They're not elected, and they don't have to listen to the people. A dictator is the law.
And his whole system was built on control. He made political parties illegal, he censored the newspapers so they couldn't criticize him, and he shut down anyone who disagreed with him. Now, at first, he actually got some support by promising to bring order back, but his heavy-handed rule started to wear thin. By 1930, he lost the support of both the army and the king, and he was forced to step down.
So, with the dictator gone, there was this big power vacuum, and the Spanish people jumped at the chance. I mean, after years of being told what to do, they were hungry for real change. They wanted to have a say in their own future.
And what they chose was to become a republic. Now, a republic is just a country that doesn't have a king or queen. Instead, the people get to vote for their leaders. It's a type of democracy. And so, in 1931, the Second Spanish Republic was born. King Alfonso XIII left the country, and a brand new era of democracy kicked off. There was a new president, Manuel Azaña, a modern new constitution. It was a time of incredible hope and excitement for a lot of people in Spain.
And this was a huge deal for Spanish society. The new rules gave everyone the right to vote, and that meant that for the first time in the country's history, women could vote too. It was a massive step forward for equality.
But all these new changes the Republic was making ended up causing a lot of division. The government wanted to reform things like land ownership and education, and most controversially, they wanted to separate the church from the government. And this split the country right down the middle. Spain became this battleground between people who loved the Republic and people who absolutely hated it.
And this deep disagreement about what Spain should be, well, it wasn't going to be solved with debates. All that political and social tension just kept building and building until, in 1936, the country plunged into the absolute darkness of a civil war.
So, in July of 1936, a group within the military, led by a general named Francisco Franco, started a rebellion against the government that had been democratically elected. They tried to take over the whole country, but they failed. And what happened instead was that Spain was literally split in two, and that's what started the horrible Civil War.
Okay, so you had two sides. On one side were the rebels, the nationalists, led by General Franco. They got a lot of help from other right-wing dictatorships like those in Germany and Italy. And on the other side, you had the Republicans, who were the official elected government. They were supported by the left-wing Soviet Union.
The Spanish Civil War was just a massive tragedy. For 3 years, Spaniards were fighting other Spaniards, brother against brother. The war became a testing ground for all kinds of new, deadly weapons. The human cost was just staggering. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed, and millions had to flee their homes.
Then, in 1939, the fighting stopped. The nationalists had won the war, and a new, very dark chapter in Spanish history was about to open. The age of Franco had begun.
General Francisco Franco, the guy who had led the winning side, became the absolute ruler of Spain. He gave himself the title Caudillo, which just means leader, and he set up a government that would keep the country in a tight grip for almost 40 years.
So Franco's dictatorship was really built on three key things. First, the military, which he used to crush anyone who opposed him. Second, the Catholic Church, which gave his government a kind of moral authority. And third, the Falange, which was his political party, and the only one allowed, which controlled pretty much every part of people's lives.
For nearly 40 years, Spain was sort of frozen in time. The years right after the war, the 40s and 50s, were incredibly hard, with a lot of poverty. Things did start to get a bit better economically in the 1960s, but there were still no political freedoms. It was a really long, tough wait for change, and that change finally came when Franco died in 1975.
Franco's death really was the end of an era. I mean, after 40 years of silence, Spain was finally free to decide its own path. But getting to democracy wasn't going to be easy. The country was still really divided by the past. The big question was, what kind of country did Spain want to be? And maybe even more important, could it heal its own wounds and build a future together?